What's going on, guys? In this video, I'm going to connect our Golang API with a Firestore database, replacing the array that we are currently using to store the data. Firestore is a NoSQL database from Google Firebase, and if you have a WordPress website or if you're planning to have one, check out Elementor. Elementor is the best page builder for WordPress. There is a link in the description below this video. Remember to share, like, and subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Okay, first, let's create our Firestore database, and we have to go to console.firebase.google.com. And here we go to create a project, and we assign a name to it. We click on continue. I'm going to disable analytics on the project. I'm going to click on create project, and this is going to take a while. Okay, the project is ready, so we click on continue. And here we need to go to database, and here where it says Cloud Firestore, we click on create database. We're going to start in production mode. Click on next. Done. I'm just setting the default location. In this case is US Central, but you can select another region or another location for the deployment of the database. Okay, now that the database is ready, we can start a collection, for example. We can assign a name to it. In our case, it's going to be posts. And this is going to be the structure that we're going to use. We're going to have an ID. That is going to be a number. We're going to have a title for our posts. There's going to be a string, and we're going to have a text. That is going to be a string as well, and we're going to use the document identifier generated by the Firestore engine. And we can add some values here. 1, title 1, and text 1, for example. And we can save this. And we have our first document created. Remember that Firebase is a NoSQL database where basically a database is a collection, and a collection has multiple documents. The next step is going to be exporting a JSON file so we can access the database. This file is going to include the private key. We need to go to Project Overview and click here on Project Settings. Then we have to go to Service Accounts, and here we need to click on Generate New Private Key, and here click on Generate Key. And this is going to download a JSON file. Let's open it. And it basically is going to include a project identifier. We're going to need to use this identifier in our code to access this database. We have a project identifier, a private key, the private key, and this one, and some other details. Okay, and once we have this JSON file, one of the recommended options to set up the access to the Firestore database and the Firebase services is creating this environment variable, Google_application_credentials. And this variable needs to point to this JSON file that we just downloaded. This will allow us to access the Firebase resources. In our case, we're going to access the Firestore database. In the first video of the series, we've been working on an initial version of our API using Max, and we were basically storing these post elements which structure is defined here within this posts array. So what we are going to do now is we're going to remove actually this array, and we're going to create a repository that is going to access our Firestore database. First, we are going to create a new file. We're going to call this post repo.go. And here we're going to create a different package. Let's call it repository. And I'm going to move this within a folder. Repository. This repository is going to have an interface that is going to be, let's call it post repository. And it's going to have two methods. It's going to have a save method that is going to receive a post. Actually, it's going to receive the reference to the post. And this is pretty common on Golang. In order to handle errors, it's going to return, in this case, we're going to return the object or the reference to the element and an error. In case we get any errors, we're going to return an error. So this is the mechanism that Golang uses to handle errors. So we always need to check if this value returned by the function is nil or not. Okay, and the other method is going to be a find all. That is going to return either a collection of posts or an array of posts or an error. So that's going to be our interface. I already created here in the routes file this struct. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this to an external file so I can import this structure from this routes file and also from this repository. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it entity and tt. And here I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it post.go. And I'm going to cut this and I'm going to paste it here. At first I need to define a package. That's going to be entity. Let's save this. Okay. And now from this repository, I'm going to import that entity. Import. And this is going to be that slash entity. From here, I can access the type by doing entity that post. And the same here, entity that post and entity that post. And now to implement this interface, we need to create an struct. I'm going to call it repo. And we're going to create a constructor to create a new instance. This is going to be new post repository. It's going to be the name of the function. And it's going to return this struct that is going to implement the post repository interface. So the type of this function is going to be post repository. And here we're going to return a reference to the repo struct, like this. Okay, and now this is going to throw an error because we are not implementing any of these methods that we declare as part of the interface. So we have to implement those methods as part of this struct. Okay, so the first function, I'm going to grab this from here. It's going to be save. And the way that we have to make that struct to implement this method is like this. We need to add it here. we can add a reference like this. Okay. We are going to start working with our Firestore database. And in order to do that, I need to import a library. I need to install a library and then import it. So I need to run go get and the location of these dependencies cloud.google.com/go/firestore. And this is going to download the dependency. And I need to import it here. I'm going to copy from here. And I'm going to add it here. Okay, the first thing that we need to do is we need to access the context of the application. And we do that by doing this. We create a variable and we assign context that background. And this should import the context dependency for us. And this background method, that's actually a method, is going to give us an empty context. Okay, and this context is a parameter that we need to pass when we create a new Firestore client. So let's create that client. We can do it like this. We need to pass the client. We need to declare a client, an error. Remember that this is the most common way that Golang uses to handle errors. Basically, you call a method and that method returns the object that you expect and also an error. And then you need to check if the error is nil or not. Okay, here we need to use Firestore, that new client. And here we pass the empty context that we created on line 22, CTX. And we need to pass the project ID. So I'm going to create a couple of constants here. Const. And one of them is going to be the project ID. That in our case is pragmatic reviews. Okay, I'm going to pass the context and then the constant that we just created, that is project ID, like this. Okay, and here I'm going to check if we get any errors. I'm going to log a message. Failed to create a Firestore client. And we can log the error like this. And here we return nil as the result, and we propagate the error here. Okay, now assuming that we didn't get an error, we can add a new element to the collection like this. We need to execute client that collection, and we need to pass the collection name. That in our case, let's go back to the Firebase console. And if we go to database, our collection name is posts. So we need to use that one. And I'm going to create a new constant. Okay, I need to add the type here actually. It's going to be string. And it's going to be string as well. Now that we have access to the collection, to the posts collection, we can call the add method. And again, we need to pass the context here again. And here what we're going to use is a map. A map is collection of key value pairs. So a map in Golang, you need to declare it like this, map. In this case, the keys are going to be strings. And if we go back to the Firebase console, we can see that this is going to be the identifier, and this is going to be the value of the map. It's going to have an ID, a text, and a title. This is the type of the key of the map. And after that, we need to declare the type of the value for each entry. In this case, it's going to be an interface. And that interface is going to include those three attributes. An identifier, and here we assign the identifier of the post. So this is post.id. And after that, we have the title. And here again, we assign the title of the post. And after that, I forgot to add comma here and here. And after that, we need to add text. Post that text, like that. Okay, and again, we need to handle, let me check. Okay, I guess, yes, the entity here. Okay, now we should be fine. Yes. And as usual, here we are going to receive the values that we expect and also the error. So we need to declare, we need to assign those values. And in this case, we're going to receive three elements. If we go here to the add method, here we can see that we get a document ref, a write result, and the error. And in our case, we are not going to use any of these. So the way that Golang provides to have variables that we are not going to use, we can use underscore for that. This is to declare blank variables or variables that we are not going to use. So we use underscore for the first one, that is actually this document ref value. The other one for this one for the write result value, and then the error, like that. Okay, and as usual, I'm going to check if I get any errors. And I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to change the message that in this case is going to be failed adding a new post, and then the details of the error. And one thing that I need to add here is I need to close the client. And one way that Golang provides to defer the execution of a specific line in our code is the defer keyword. And here we can say client.close, for example. And this is going to close the Firestore client once the function finishes. So once this function returns a value, the client is going to close. So this line is going to be executed after this function returns a value. And now what I need to do is I need to return the post and nil. This is the case where we didn't get any errors. So that's it for the save function. We still need to implement the find all method. Here we get that message we get that with an error that says that we are not implementing the find all method. So we're going to do that. I'm going to copy this from here. So func, and here we need to pass again the reference to the struct, that is the repo. Okay, here again, we need to create a context, we need to create the client. Maybe we can move this to a function, and we need to return, yes, the context, we need to return the client, but yeah, that's gonna be better from the design perspective and to avoid repeating code. But for now, I'm going to copy and paste just to move on. Okay, let me see. Okay, and here again, we need to close the client once the function finishes. And I'm going to create a variable here that is going to be an array of posts, and I'm going to iterate the posts document from Firestore, and I'm going to add those elements within this array. So this is going to be an array of posts. This is entity.post, and here I'm going to get an iterator. And the way I have to get the iterator for the collection is client.collection. I need to pass the collection name. That is one of our constants. That is actually this one. And here I need to use the documents element. As we can see here, documents returns an iterator over the query's resulting documents. So we call documents and we pass the context again here. Okay, and now that we have this iterator, we can execute a for sentence. And within this loop, we need to access each element by using the next method, iterator.next. And here we assign the value that we expect and the error. And here we handle the error. If there is an error, we do something like this. And here we can say fail to iterate the list of posts, and we return nil as a result, and then we propagate the error, we throw the error. Okay, if we didn't get any errors, we create the post. We need to use the post struct like this, and we need to assign the values, but by getting those values from the document. That is the value that we get here when we call the next method of the iterator. So here we have ID, and this is doc.data, and this is an array. So here we pass the name of the attribute as the index of this array, and this is going to be an int, like that. And the same for the title. In this case, it's going to be a string. and the same for the text. Great. And now we add this post to the posts collection. We use a pen for that. Posts, post. The period and the type here is a type assertion. And in case that, for example, this identifier is a string, this is going to throw an error. The same here, if we get a number as a title, this is going to also throw an error. Okay, and here we need to return the array and nil. So when we reach this point, it's because we didn't get any errors. Okay, and we should not have any more errors here. Yes, now the struct is implementing both methods that we defined here on this interface. Okay, and now that our repo is ready, we are going to replace this posts array from here, and we're going to use that repo. So we're going to import the repository. This is the package. And here we're going to declare that repository. Let's call it repo. And the type of this repo is going to be repository.post repository. That is actually this interface that we declare here. And this is going to be, and here we need to call the new post repository function. Repository. And this is also within this package. So I need to add the package at the beginning. Okay, and now we have access to this function. Great. Okay, and this init function, we don't need it, so I'm going to remove it. And now I'm going to replace these posts. So actually these posts are going to come from the database. So I need to use posts and error. And here I need to use the repo. So repo.findAll. This is the method. And here we need to actually handle that error. If there are any errors, we need to return something like error getting the posts. And after that, if we don't get any errors, I'm going to remove this. And I'm going to return the HTTP 200. And I'm going to use JSON that new encoder. I'm going to pass the HTTP response as a parameter. And I'm going to encode the array. So posts here. And that's it for the getPosts method. Okay, moving on to the addPost method. I need to actually import the entity, this one. So I'm going to do that. Here I need to import the entity package. So here, this is not post, it's entity that post, like that. And here I don't have this array anymore. So what I'm going to do to generate the identifier of the post, that is actually ID, like that. I'm going to assign a random number. So I'm going to use our library to generate that random number, that is rand that int, like that. And this is the library that I'm using now to generate that random number. So I guess that, let's check this function returns, yeah, an int and an error. So yeah, we need to add the error here. And what's the problem? Begin type int. It looks like the types are different. So okay, I'm going to use a different library that is within this package, math/rand. And let's see if I can use this method. And I guess, yeah, that works. Okay, and this returns an int, and here this is an int. So we're good. And I don't need to add this post to the array. I need to replace this by calling the save method from the repo. So I need to pass the post here. I need to pass actually the reference to the post. And here what I'm going to do is something similar to this. JSON, new encoder, encode response, and I'm going to encode the post like that. So let's try this. So first, let's check what we have in the database. We only have one element. That is this one, ID1, text1, and title1. And let's run the get operation. So we should get, okay, let's see what's going on. Okay, we have an error. Interface conversion is int64. Okay, this is the type that we need to use to match with this, with the number type for the identifier. Okay, so let's use that. So I need to change this type here, int64. I need to go to the repo and I need to replace that type here, int64. And here I need to use another function. Let's see. And this one, int63 returns an int64 type. So we're going to use that one to generate our random identifier. And now let's run this. I'm going to remove all the elements from the database. Delete document. And I'm going to remove this one as well. Okay, now we don't have any documents. So I'm going to create the first one. It's going to be title1 and text1. Okay, if we go to the database, yes, we have this random identifier, text1 and title1. And if we execute the get operation, we get that element. I'm going to create a new one. Let's say title 323 and text 333. We send this. Okay, we go to the database. Yes, we have that information there. And if we execute the get operation, yes, we get both elements. Okay, that's pretty much all I have for today. In the next video, I'm going to refactor this code because here we have like a mix between things that are part of a controller typically, like sending a content type in the header, and it's mixed with some logic. So I'm going to implement a clean architecture. So we're going to have a better separation of concerns. So thank you guys for watching, and I see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.